Hey everyone, what's going on? It's Tristan here, and welcome back to another episode of the Tristan podcast. It is episode 4, and once again, I'm joined by Tom. How's it going, Tom?
It's going well, and as I've said every time, it's always an honor to be here.
And it's always great to have you by my side during these podcasts. And today we have our first ever guest, Jono. How's it going, Jono?
I'm doing well, Chirstian. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Yeah, very honoured that you accepted my invitation. Yeah, but tell us a bit about yourself, Jono, just to give, I guess, the audience about like an idea of who you are.
Yeah, I'm studying a Bachelor of Theology. Um, I've also got a major in archaeology. Um, I'm currently doing research in archaeology. I'm doing an honours thesis. Um, yeah, so I'm also, as a hobby, I also like writing stories, especially science fiction, fantasy. Uh, yeah, that's basically basically the um, major things I'm doing.
Yeah, no. Well, yeah, once again, it's great to have you. I'm sure we'll get into some good discussions this episode. Um, yeah, just as like a start off intro question, which will sort of link in with our topic for the episode, which I'll get into a bit later. I was going to ask you guys, and I'll answer it myself as well. Just yeah, what sort of movie or TV show have you watched recently? We'll start with you, Jono.
Yeah, so I haven't been watching anything recently, but the most recent show I watched is The Chosen, which is, I mean, quite a popular show about the life of Jesus and the people that met him. And yeah, I mean, I quite enjoyed the show. It's pretty well made.
Hmm. Yep. Tom, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really watched anything recently either, but the most recent thing that I saw was Castle in the Sky. It's a Japanese film by Studio Ghibli. Um, I didn't know what to expect, but it was amazing. Highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't seen it, and if you have seen it, go rewatch it. You know that you want to rewatch it. Go rewatch it.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, and for me, it'll be The Office US. Yeah, it's a very rewatchable show in my opinion. It's just the comfort show. You know, when you're doing stuff, I can have on the background. Um, yeah, and it just always gives me a good laugh. But yeah, so having said that, we're actually going to be talking this episode about, I guess, entertainment as a whole to sort of summarize it, and more so looking at movies and TV shows. I guess like the different categories of them, and more specifically, even how they have been recently in our society and whatnot. But yeah, sort of linking back to, I guess, even Jono's answer. We're going to start off by talking, I guess, about the Christian movies and TV shows, and we'll, yeah, talk about them first. So, yeah, Jono, kick us off. What are your thoughts about, I guess, Christian movies and TV shows?
Yeah, I guess generally, from what I've observed and what a few other people have observed, um, Christian movies and TV shows in, I guess, the last few decades, I guess, haven't been that good. I mean, some of them are quite cringe, but there are also some really well-made Christian TV shows, and some of them are not actually um, explicitly Christian, but actually have really powerful Christian themes in them. And I don't know, maybe that's because this our society is influenced by Christianity, and those themes find themselves expressed in TV shows, and they end up becoming really well-made shows and movies. But yeah, I would say, yeah, a lot of Christian movies tend not be as good because what I notice is it's the message that is the most primary goal. their agenda is the primary goal rather than telling a good story. And I think that's why a lot of Christian movies don't tend to be as entertaining or as well made as, I guess, other movies that the world likes watching.
I want to hone in on something that you said there. You said that you feel that one of the main reasons that they haven't been as good is because they're focusing more on the message rather than telling a good story. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess I'll actually add to that and say rather than because the message obviously is great. I mean, you know, the message is important, but it's like it's very on the nose. Some of these these movies tend to be like they're very preachy. Like what I have in mind is God is not dead, for example. That's I haven't seen it, but I heard people talk about it. It's quite
No,
it's
no.
in your face.
When you mentioned God is Dead, I can see what you're talking about because I did see the first God is Dead movie years ago, and you are right. My experience of it was that it was pretty on the nose, leading to a lot of stereotypes that just feel oversimplified the issues. I think I can see what you're saying about that emphasis on message as opposed to storytelling.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
and yeah, even with like I'd say like I enjoyed at least the first God's Not Dead movie. But even then, yeah, it was I guess a bit like sort of black and white simplistic, which I mean I guess at the end of the day that's the Christian message. You're either living your life for Christ or you're not. But more so in this real life context, yeah, it was just a bit I guess the best way I'd say it is like cliche almost. Um,
I feel like there's a
yeah.
bit more to the Christian message than just you're living your life for Christ or you're not. There's a
Uh,
bit. I
it
feel like
can
there's
be
more to the message as
simplified
a
to
whole.
that, but there's a lot more to it than that. That's just more
Well,
so.
true. I guess what I'm trying to emphasize is that it's not just you're either in or you're out. Like yes, you can distill a lot of its themes to that message, but there's also a lot more of just cosmic significance than just. I mean, there's a level of both. Is what I'm trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
say there.
But yeah, more so like while there is just black and white in Christianity, there's also some other like yeah, different aspects to it. But yeah, just I guess back on to I guess yeah, just moves a whole though. Yeah, like I see what you mean though with how it focuses on the message and not I guess the storytelling and I guess like the flow of the movies. Yeah, personally, like there's some good Christian movies I enjoy, and yeah, there's definitely others that yeah I would agree with you. They're a bit not as good or just sort of I guess like predictable. Yeah, but I don't know if you guys have watched this before, but yeah, one show I enjoy for I guess just the way it was made to sort of the historical accuracy. While also preaching the message was the movie, sorry, called Risen. Um, yeah, it's always a good like watch, especially about Easter, just sort of focusing on Christ's resurrection. Um, yeah.
Yeah, haven't watched it. Haven't watched it personally. Um, I mean, what would you say you liked about it?
I think I liked they took it from the perspective of a Roman tribune. So it starts like sort of when Jesus was being put to death on the cross, and then it follows his perspective as they search for the missing body of Christ from the tomb, and then he ends up sort of following along with the disciples and then seeing the resurrected Christ, and yeah, so it gives a bit of a different perspective than like the general Gospels do. Yeah, so that's sort of what I would like about it, and yeah.
Yeah, that really reminds me a lot of how The Chosen was sort of intended to, like the actual story of The Chosen was intended to be. Essentially, it's like the main characters are like the people who meet Jesus, and it's sort of there's this their character arc and their stories are sort of written in a historical setting, within the gospel stories, but it's it's in a plausible situation. Like, for example, um, one of the main characters, Mary Magdalene, we sort of meet her, we see, um, you know, before she becomes a disciple of Jesus, before she has her demons cast out, and you sort of track her story through the whole, the seasons and when she becomes Christian. Yeah, and there's a lot of good character development. But at the same time, it's there's the historical accuracy and, of course, most importantly, biblical accuracy. And and I guess that those shows or those TV shows and movies, I guess what is good about them is they have there's that character element to it. Like you see the character is driving the plot rather than the plot always. They have to always react to things in the plot.
Mm.
And yeah, and basically that's what makes those shows really enjoyable.
Mhm. I think also another thing with in terms of Christian movies that are based on, I guess, biblical times is when you're making them, you can't obviously, you don't want to stuff up the, I guess, the historical context and like what has been said in the Bible. Like you can't really just like change it to build up like, I don't know, like suspense or drama to it. Like you sort of want
Yeah,
to stick to the text without like sort of ruining it, if that makes sense. Um,
yeah. Those are one of the major criticisms people have towards The Chosen is because there's a lot of that background, speculative, plausible stuff that surrounds those key scenes are directly from the scriptures. And I mean the show's not for everyone. I mean, but as a whole, I think the writers do quite well getting that in line, that balance. But
Yeah.
I mean that.
Let me just get back to something you said. Why would you say that The Chosen is not for everyone? I mean, I haven't watched it personally, but I feel like, I mean, based on what you've said, you seem to have given it fairly high acclaim. So
Yeah, look, I mean, The Chosen is very is there's a lot of drama. There's a lot of scenes within, I guess, in the last few seasons, season 4 and 5, like 4 and 3, are really focused on characters that pretty much don't really appear in the gospel, or they might appear, but they only have mentioned like a few times.
mm,
And they've given this whole backstory.
yeah,
And some people, I mean, some people say, "Oh, are you adding? Is this adding to the word? Is this,
mm,
um, is this?" Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that debate. But again, in terms of from a storytelling perspective, the writing's great, character development is great, and the payoff, which is mostly the payoff scenes, are the big biblical scenes, are really accurate. And I think, I mean, if you can do that, then I don't have a problem with that. So that, there are people who are a bit uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
mm,
mm. Yeah, one thing as well when it comes to, yeah, I personally haven't seen The Chosen either, but like just in general in terms of those like, I guess, gospel, like the sort of the times of Jesus movies that are centered around that, and TV shows, is like when portraying Jesus. I've mentioned this to you guys before. When like they portray Jesus, they picture him as this like really good looking guy, like, he's amazing. But like the thing is, like Isaiah 53, very clear that he wasn't someone who had like any sort of beauty or anything that anyone should regard him like. He was meant to be like a very sort of small, frail character. Like that's how sort of he's described in Isaiah. yeah, so that's just one thing that I always have a bit of uh I don't know. I wouldn't say like look, it's not something I hate. It's just I don't know, a disliking.
It's just something that sort of like stays in your head. And so
Yeah,
whenever you see it, whenever you see something that sort of like goes against that, you're like, you're like this isn't as good as it could be. This is missing something.
yeah, but also even it would like break that sort of stigma of like oh because Jesus was the Messiah, he was really good looking and whatnot. But like even when it comes to like movies and TV shows and like acting, like it's just you pick people like for characters that are meant to be like good or amazing, you just generally like sort of gravitate to picking someone who is, I guess, like appealing and whatnot. Like, so I can't really fault them, but at the same time, yeah. um,
There is an
yeah.
observation that when when humans perceive someone who appears, you know, physically attractive or just good looking, we tend to attribute other good qualities onto them as well.
Mm.
And if we see someone that looks like really shifty or ugly, we tend to attribute negative qualities to them, even if they're really not, even if they're not based on anything at all. So, I mean, I can see where you're coming from, but it does help from. I mean, even from a narrative point of view, you can understand why they'd choose like I guess you could say more attractive lead actors because you can. It's easier to attribute these good protagonist qualities onto them than if you
Mm.
just pick someone who's average. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but there is reason for it.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I do still understand your issues with it.
Mm. Yeah. Um, I guess also, yeah, we've been talking about, I guess, Christian movies and TV shows that are very much so based more on like the historical side of things, but like even like I guess now we can put a bit more focus on like contemporary movies that are sort of, movies based on like sort of our time now, but with Christian themes to them. We sort of touched on like God's Not Dead. Like, are there any other ones that sort of come to your mind that you've watched? Um,
I mean, this was set in I think the 1970s, but it's the Case for Christ, the story of Lee
yeah, yeah.
Strobel, the journalist. I mean that's definitely a movie that was sort of it's sort of like it's sort of shadowed by like these modern ideas of rationality and like logical inquiry against like what appears to be a seemingly like blind um, foundationless faith. There's that sort of conflict there that Strobel has to go through. He's trying to
Mm.
sort of uncover the truth. That's one movie that really sticks out as an example.
Mm-hmm. Jono, you have any?
I guess the best example of a Christian film that is um has really strong Christian themes is The Lord of the Rings. As Tolkien himself was a Catholic, and his best friend was C.S. Lewis. Um, yeah, and Tolkien, the theme is Catholic theology is heavily influenced his works, and the movies portray that philosophy and that theology really well. And I guess you guys can all agree with that.
Oh yeah,
I
oh
not
yeah.
not disagreeing.
We are no strangers to Lord of the Rings.
Of
Yeah, no,
course.
if you guys couldn't tell, yeah, we definitely have maybe watched Lord of the Rings once or twice.
Yeah, just in case it wasn't clear.
Yeah. I bring up C.S. Lewis, even then I guess Narnia. That
Yeah.
that's one that's more of like a fictional, but with that. But I think even with Narnia though, C.S. Lewis deliberately had like reflect, I guess even Aslan reflecting Christ, and sort of ways like that. Whereas I guess Tolkien had that like the themes and elements of like sort of that the Christian themes in Lord of the Rings, but it wasn't. I'm pretty sure he said something wasn't like directly meant to be tied to like any of the like biblical stories or anything.
I mean, I feel like there's a
Yeah.
there's a level of both at play. Like you could argue that Aragorn takes a bit of a messiah-like figure. I mean, he's like the chosen king coming back from like the ancient lineage, but I do understand. Aslan does have a much more sort of like god-esque image to him. Whereas I think Tolkien sort of spreads the themes out a bit more because I mean I mentioned Aragorn as a sort of the messianic king, but Gandalf has a literal resurrection.
Yeah. And then Frodo also bears the ultimate evil,
Yeah.
which was sort of Christ bearing our sins on
Yeah.
the cross. So yeah, it's a bit more like you have to combine there. Like yeah, I for one do enjoy at least the Narnia movie. I haven't read the book.
Books,
I would be
plural.
keen to, but
Plural. It is a series.
yeah, books, yeah, but more so like yeah, the first one especially has those themes with Aslan. Oh, sorry, spoilers for Narnia, with Aslan obviously yeah dying, and then rising again. But
I'm just
yeah,
gonna be a bit of a stickler for rules and say that's technically not the first book.
oh okay,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the second book actually. The
right,
first book has. I mean, I was thinking of the four children and Aslan in the
yeah.
story you're talking
I
about.
was thinking
Yeah,
the first movie, like, but yeah,
yeah.
if
No,
the
the
movies
first
do differently.
movie of Narnia actually isn't the first book.
Oh right,
Yeah, that was
okay,
a prequel, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's
From what I
because
remember.
yeah, I don't have the books on hand, but yeah, so
right,
yeah,
Been a while.
the story of Narnia is much bigger
okay.
than it would seem at first glance.
Something I've learnt. All right. Fact for the day. Yeah, but I mean, like, when now more so coming back to, I guess, like that sort of, I mean, it's still fiction, but like that non-fiction, like sort of real life movies with like Christian themes. One that comes to mind for me that I've always enjoyed and sort of grown up with, in a family is a movie called like Fireproof, where it's about this guy who's struggling with his marriage. He's a fireman as well, which is I guess where you get like the title. But is sort of working through his marriage, and as he's doing that, he sort of, I guess like he grew up in a Christian home, but he sort of, I guess, discovers Christ for himself, and how he's like called to um yeah live and like even love his wife. Yeah, that's one that I've always enjoyed.
There's a movie that I enjoyed really like a really good movie. It's directed by Mel Gibson. It's a film called Hacksaw Ridge. Have you heard of
Oh
that
yeah,
movie?
yeah.
It's based on a true story. World War II. Main character, Seventh Day Adventist. Um, he almost kills his brother when he's a young kid,
Mm.
and he becomes a pacifist. He doesn't believe in killing people and violence. And yeah, he gets enlisted into the military, and he refuses to use a gun in battle, and he becomes a medic. And essentially, the film just shows, he's the only character who's willing to show, uh, compassion and love towards, not just his own comrades in battle, but anyone who's wounded, even the Japanese. So that the film just really does it really well.
Mm.
Just show that.
Yeah, so remind me, that character was acted by Andrew Garfield, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
my boy.
Yes, Desmond Doss.
Yeah.
He was great.
Yeah. Yeah, like I also really love that movie. Warning, if you do go watch it, there is a bit of gore, like in terms of like the like war scenes. But yeah, I loved when I researched a bit more into the actual true story. Like at the end, it says that he saved like 75 lives, but the number was actually close to like 150, and that like the Desmond Doss, like the real life person, he only wanted them to say like 50, but in the end they like sort of worked to the middle. But yeah, like you said, he saved not just like Americans, but also like Japanese. Yeah, so yeah, that was a really amazing story.
I
Yeah,
mean, you
it
have.
really.
Sorry,
Yeah.
you continue.
Okay, so yeah, it's really this just shows the Christ-like sacrifice Desmond had. Um, and the courage of that is really, the film portrays it really heroically, and yeah, and Christian themes is I mean, Mel Gibson has done really great movies. Passion of the Christ, for example, is one of his most famous Christian films. And I don't know much about Mel Gibson and his beliefs, but I think he's very sympathetic towards the Christian tradition. And some of his films do reflect that respect. Definitely in Hacksaw Ridge and Passion.
What were you going to say, Tom?
I mean, I was only. I mean, John, I kind of already mentioned it. I was only gonna just point out that it's really incredible to think of someone in a war zone having the level of empathy to be and courage to be willing to put himself at risk to save not just his own allies and the people he's fighting with, but also those he's fighting against.
Mm.
Especially when you consider the sort of toll that being in a war zone like that can take on an individual to still maintain that level of empathy is actually quite remarkable. It's considering there's a lot of the reports of what happens to soldiers in these sorts of conflicts is terrifying, and to see someone sort of like live as an example of the opposite of actually doing something heroic and in such a situation is it's just I'm at a loss for words. There's just I don't really know how I can describe it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess we'll move on now, I guess, to just movies and TV shows in general, and especially focusing on, I guess the question I'll pose to you guys is, what's your thoughts on the direction that movies and TV shows have sort of gone down in recent times?
I mean,
Yeah.
do you want us to restrict that specifically to like Western film, or should we include
Yeah,
like more?
yeah, I guess just like Western is sort of the like like
Yeah.
the main movies that we as a sort of Western society see.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, I watched a really interesting video, insightful video that sort of does explain sort of this question. It's the idea that, the idea a lot of films these days, especially with the rise of streaming services, a lot of companies that want to produce content that not only anticipates you to make a whole franchise, to produce more content, but also to uh, use nostalgia baiting, which is essentially trying to um, please the audience with like sort of treat the audience as if they're like children in a way. So, and this has been criticized by a lot of movie critics as being quite chaotic because, for example, they call this the Marvelization of cinema, because they're talking about like so Marvel Studios, they produce a massive franchise of the Avengers, Infinity War. They're tying all these films and um, stories together, all these characters. It's monumental, and it comes to this end point, the end game. And from that point on, what are you going to do next? You've got all this money to make, and as what we've seen after the Infinity War saga, we have all these other random shows that don't really make any sense, and
As in,
not many people are interested in.
yeah, as in, like they don't really link together in the same way that the previous content from the
Yeah,
Marvel films did.
I haven't seen it because I mean, I'm sort of given up on watching them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
but
say so though. Yeah, like
it's
there's a lot more random shows now that it's very hard to keep up, especially with the TV shows. But yeah, continue on.
yeah. I was just using Marvel as an example because that's
Mm.
probably the best
Yeah,
example
no,
in
I,
this
I
case.
understand what you're saying. I mean, if we're talking about something like Marvelization, then we think that Marvel probably would be the best
Mm.
example to use.
Yeah,
It is a very good example though, especially like if someone like me, like it was at the point where, you'd be going, like when I was in high school, you'd be going to the movies like a couple times a year or 3 times a year when Marvel released like a new movie. And yeah, you did feel like it was just sort of like progressing along and that, everything was like for the most part there was linked. There were some solo movies and whatnot, but like in the end, like it was building up to Infinity War where all those movies tied in. And then like Endgame on top of that. Um, and then yeah, sort of at the end of Endgame was like, where do you go from here? And then that's when they started doing TV shows and just trying to introduce all these different other characters. And it's also sort of when it started to get a bit repetitive, like it's like, okay, yeah, it's a superhero movie. The origin, they get their powers, they come across a villain, they cop it, and then they come back harder and are able to defeat the villain, and yeah, happy ever after. Like it just sort of got a bit repetitive, and it was just too much to be able to keep up with Marvel with how many things they were pumping out. At least me personally. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it just comes down to the idea of um, storytelling in general. So, like, you have your core idea and your themes and characters, and it's generally called anti-entropic storytelling, which sort of means all your ideas and characters and themes are all linked and they all have meaning, and I guess everything's tightly knit to with each other. So you know there's a purpose, there's a meaning, you can tell there's structure, there's order to the story, and now it looks like a lot of franchises are trying to imitate Marvel. Um, yeah, there's just countless examples of this. Jurassic World, maybe, or
Mm.
Dark Universe. There's all these DC. There's all these franchises that are trying to copy Marvel, and they all just fall apart. And this has been observed, and this is called entropic storytelling, which is you have this really cool idea, but then as you make your content, it's just becoming more chaotic and more complex, and it's just fragmenting and becoming this mess of just nostalgia baiting and hollow storytelling. And
Mm.
It's like it's getting
yeah,
bigger and bigger, but it's got this really small foundation, and it's unable to
yeah,
support itself.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And yeah, a lot of people have sort of what this is sort of what a lot of mainstream shows and movies have sort of become these days. Is yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with making more money and you know, um, yeah, and yeah, there's a lot of things involved, but it's the corporation. There's not a lot of passion put in these projects. I
Mm.
think that's a big important thing. 'Cause if you look at again, I'm going to bring up Lord of the Rings again, but if you look at the behind the scenes with Peter Jackson and his team, the amount of detail and effort that they put into creating the sets, um, everything involved in the production. It was just a lot of passion and effort and dedication to make Tolkien's world come alive. And then in contrast, if you look at these blockbuster films that come out pretty much every year, they don't have as much weight. They're not
Mm.
as they're not timeless, if you know what I mean. They're not yeah.
Yeah, and
I
I
mean,
think the the issue there is like, so again, how you brought up Lord of the Rings is the reason it was so good is because they took the time and effort to really make it good. And the problem now is nowadays you just got the big companies that just want to pump out projects, just make some money, um, without sort of putting in the hard yards. Yeah, sorry, Tom, you were
I
gonna
mean,
say something.
isn't that? I mean, my only thing I was gonna say was, is there really? Can we really say that there's a lack of passion on the behalf of most modern storytellers? I mean, just take an example. I'm not sure if any of you have seen Moon Knight, it was a Marvel TV show that, yeah, I mean, Oscar Isaac and Ethan Hawke, they're, they're say what you will about the show, but their performances in Moon Knight were really, really good quality. Like there was effort and precision just that both of them placed into their roles. I mean, especially with Oscar in the way that he's able to flick between Mark and Steven. I believe those were the two personalities. It's
Yeah.
been a while since I've watched the show, but the way he's able to move between them so fluidly and seamlessly, it's can really say that there's a lack of passion on the part of most shows, because I feel like you can say that. I feel like a lot of shows have there is these. I mean, there is effort, surely, or
Yeah.
do we think that that's actually just like a rare occurrence, and that
Well,
Moon
look,
Knight's just an exception?
I'm not denying that there's there's really good movies and TV shows that come out nowadays. I mean, there's definitely those really great ones, as you mentioned. But yeah, I feel like, yeah, I mean, majority of content, because like the industry is just so massive now, and then obviously you got the streaming services and the need for money and all that sort of stuff. And oh yeah, I mean,
But
there's
hasn't there
definitely,
always been a need for money in the industry? I mean,
yeah, I guess that's true, definitely. But again, that's not the only factor. I think there's a lot of other
Yeah.
issues that.
I guess sort of going off what you're posing, Tom, I think, yeah, there's always, even now, like in posts now, there definitely is like effort and whatnot. But like even, I guess like, especially on like the acting side of things, you still have good actors and like good effort being portrayed, but like, some pretty average or bad movies, TV shows. Personally, I also enjoyed Moon Knight. I thought it was good. I think it was one of the few Marvel projects of like the post Endgame that like actually worked and I enjoyed. Um, but I think it's more so now that like there's more pressure being put on from the bigger companies, like so Marvel, for instance, again, like there's more pressure just wanting to pump out a lot more projects just for you know to earn the money and whatnot than to actually focus on the quality. Like it's more so quantity over quality nowadays. Doesn't mean there isn't any good. Like there are some movies or TV shows that come out that are good. And on top of that, it's also comes down to a matter of writing, like how good's the story writing. And I guess I'll bring this into it now. I think something that else that's obviously been coming up with recent projects is, I guess, politics and I guess wokeness, um, which is something that a lot of projects now follow in Western culture, which then it sort of diminishes writing and sort of character because then they just like focus on those sort of
I guess we
ideas
can.
and force it.
Yeah, I guess we can talk about the entire controversy surrounding the Snow White reboot.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
And like,
I haven't
yeah.
seen it, but
Oh, it's not.
Apparently,
It's not out
oh,
yet.
it's not out yet.
yeah.
It
Okay.
just.
Apparently, like it's still going on. There's this massive back and forth. I mean, do you want to summarize what happened basically? Because my knowledge is a bit hazy, probably a bit one-sided. But,
Basically, they cast Rachel Zegler, I could be saying the last name wrong, as Snow White, who is a um, Latino like woman, which yeah, obviously Snow White is called Snow White because her skin's is like as white as snow, whatever. However you want to go into it. But it's not even that. Like Disney's done that so many times with different movies.
I mean, some people also found it a bit weird that they cast Gal Gadot. I
Yeah,
don't know if I'm pronouncing
Gal
her name,
Gadot.
as
Yeah.
as like the Wicked Queen,
Yeah.
and given her her race, that was seen as a bit of
Mm.
a less than thought out plan.
Mm. But like it wasn't even
Whereas,
just that though. Also the fact that like there were some interviews that they had about the movie where Rachel Zegler was just hating on the original Snow White movie, which is like then bringing the question like, why is she then playing Snow White if she didn't even like the show? And then she was just sort of bringing up how like, yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that she brought up. Basically didn't sit well with a lot of people. And then even like the whole controversy with the seven dwarves just being like not dwarves, like this is an opportunity to actually give like a specific role to like, you know, dwarves or like people with dwarvism, however you want to phrase it. But like then all of a sudden they can't because then like that's too like I don't know, it's something ridiculous. So yeah, there's just been a lot of controversy with that. Um, yeah,
It's been a bit of a back and forth, honestly.
yeah,
It,
literally.
it, it is amusing on the one hand, just being like, oh yes, look, funny arguments on the internet, haha. But I mean, it's
Mm.
also, it was also even worse when what's that company called? I think like the Daily Wire or something.
Ah, yeah, yeah,
And they
Daily
just
Wire.
they just make their own Snow White with like
Yeah,
a white actress, and that was
mate,
it's just really like
I'm all
it is
for
really
that.
funny, but like I mean, it also is just a little sad that these sorts of arguments and things just continue for so long and that they don't get resolved. Um,
Mate, I love that was such a funny move by the Daily Wire. Like I'm all for that.
no, it was just really, it was just, it was hilarious. Like
Yeah, but I
just in
guess
the midst of all this, they're just like, hey, so we heard that that's this thing with Snow White going on. That's great. Anyway, would you like our Snow White?
yeah. I guess like on that, another thing is like most new projects or most movies and TV show projects now are either like remakes of like animation to live action or just like a remake in general, or they're a sequel, or they're like a spin-off show. Um, which yeah, again, it's like there's no good new original ideas being produced. Um, yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are
Um,
on that.
I mean, the idea of creating a spin-off of, you know, a certain character from a series. I mean, you could do original. You can be quite original in that. It just depends on which character and I guess, yeah, this type of movie or show you're trying to make. But yeah, I agree there. Generally, there is that, yeah, they're just trying to remake. I mean, especially the if Disney literally just beat by beat remaking classic
Yeah.
film and just putting in live action. That's like I think this is lazy
Mm,
and probably a waste of money. But
mm.
you know,
Yeah.
I
I
And
mean,
I
on the one
guess
hand, you can kind of understand why. Like, you take the Predator franchise. You've got the first Predator movie, which is just these you know top of the range soldiers fighting alien hunter, and then you keep doing that for a while, and then they cross over with Alien, and even though critics seem to dislike it, that crossover film makes more money than any of the previous Predator films. Then it's like people might be saying one thing, but the ticket sales are saying something else, and so you see studio sort of double down on that because clearly that's because it's a business, right? Like it would based from that perspective. It's the more lucrative way to make money. Um, but then I guess that kind of raises the other question where if you're running a business, can your only like priority or goal be just the making of money and just turning over a profit?
mm. Yeah, it's not that obviously making sequels or like spin-off shows or remaking like a show from animation to live action is bad. Like there are a lot of things that are in those criteria that I enjoy. Like it's the fact that now it's just like basically every new movie or show that comes out is like under those categories, and then it's sort of like becoming just like I guess sort of ridiculous to an extent, especially I guess with spin-off shows, just how many different like side characters, like whether it could be like a different villains in franchises, that's become a popular one. Or like just yeah, other side characters, like especially even with Star Wars, that's become a popular thing to sort of make. Yeah, I think that's sort of my issue. It's just that like every project falls under those categories now for the most part. Like even now the Australian version of The Office, which like the trailer just makes me want to like have wished I never watched it. But I don't think I'm
Just want
watching.
to get back those minutes of your life.
Yeah, like that was a waste of 2 minutes of my life, and I'm definitely not watching the show because like yeah, it seemed like humor was so forced, and it's just like again like not not there for it. Um, yeah,
It's the narrative entropy thing again. It's just making more spin-offs and get this good idea, and then we have to continue with it. We have to making more. It's essentially that's the I guess I guess that's sort of what's happening really, generally speaking.
mm. But yeah, it's something that's yeah really sort of I guess like is a sad thing for me is you know I guess especially pre-COVID, like just going to the cinemas was a lot more of a common thing. There'd always be like a movie that's like kind of interesting to go watch, or like even if it was just like a movie that's just like new, you had no idea what it was about, you could go watch it and not like risk all of a sudden watching a movie that's just like shoving politics down your throat or is just completely terrible. But like now it's like obviously streaming services dominate society now as well as all those other things. Um, yeah, it's just a sad thing.
You're
Um,
saying there's just like a greater sense of apathy now, like in terms of attending cinema. Would that be what you're saying?
yeah, like oh, I think it's a general thing. It's definitely something with me. Like, just don't go to the cinemas as much as I used to. Like, it was almost like once every month or two, I'd be going watch a movie in the cinemas, and it's like now it's like once or twice a year at best.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Anyway, I guess the question I'll ask, which we'll sort of discuss and will just lead us to a bit of a close, is: do you think it can be objectively said that movies and TV shows have gotten worse, or is it still sort of a more subjective, up to just like left to one's opinion sort of thing? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I guess my first thought probably be I'm guessing it might be subjective. 'Cause again, there are quite a good handful amount of films and TV shows that come out, and a lot of them are not as successful, but they do come out and they're really well produced. So there is, I mean, objectively, I guess, in terms of storytelling, uh, dialogue, and all that sort of stuff. But even in the mainstream, I guess there are some average, you know, productions that come out, and yeah, I guess it sort of depends on the audience, really. But I could be wrong. This is my feeling.
Hmm. Yeah, Tom, any
Yeah.
thoughts?
I mean, I've got to agree with Jono. Like, it's when it comes to questions of like what people enjoy or don't enjoy, there's always going to be a level of subjectivity involved. Um, and like, I suppose in terms of it would seem from a very simple surface level observation, it would seem that like the big name studios, so to speak, in Hollywood are not producing as many quality pieces as perhaps they were previously. Um, but I mean, on the flip side, you could say that also can be an opportunity, because when because it this that can sort of provide as the groundwork for new creativity and for new ideas to develop and to become popular. If you try to put it, I'll give you an example. Just use video games as just a bit of a example. In, I believe, 2010, there was a video game that was released by a studio called Remedy. That the game was called Alan Wake. It was a fairly it was a good quality video game. It told a decent story, pretty decent acting, decent cast, pretty very interesting themes and messages all sort of like wound up together. But despite its quality, it was overshadowed by a much bigger game that got released. That game being Red Dead Redemption, that was released by Rockstar Studios, and that absolutely took the world by storm when it came out. And so Alan Wake as a game never really got that much attention. But 13 years later, people discover, hey, Alan Wake actually had a massive fan base, and then they release a sequel that comes out to essentially universal acclaim. And I bring that up only to say that perhaps in the age where, say, Marvel was at its best, there simply wouldn't have been as much public attention on other works that might have been of very good quality, but just weren't as popular at the time. But now that we're in a stage where there seems to be a general sort of dissatisfaction with Marvel, a general sort of sense of apathy with franchise building, this could be the groundwork for new creativity, for new ideas, for an entire new generation of storytelling to spring up. And I'd mention something else here as well. It always strikes me as odd that we see. I mean, I suppose you could still say we sort of live in an age of Marvelization, and superheroes have never been more popular in cinemas than they have right now. We've never had more superhero content than this. We've never had more we've never had more superheroes. But then, I'm going to say, speaking for Western society specifically again, we seem to have a lack of real life heroes. I mean, in the sense of the Romans worshipped Caesar, for example. They Julius Caesar. I mean, they saw him as an idol. I mean, Shakespeare wrote an entire play about it. We have the way that Napoleon was sort of valorized by his men. Alexander the Great, while he was still at the height of his power, was valorized by his people. We had Winston Churchill was he was universally praised by his people and by most of the Western world, even as recently as JFK. I was just thinking, there's that line of his where he says, I believe it goes, I don't remember the exact words, but something along the lines of, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I was just thinking, I can't imagine many politicians in the Western world saying that now without getting a lot of backlash. I mean, I feel like there's this assumption that the country has to provide for the people, because that's what a government is for. But that's going a bit off topic. That's a slightly different issue. But I mean, the reason that I went to that whole historical rant as well was just to point out that we don't have society as a whole doesn't seem to have these larger than life heroes in the same way that the societies of the past did. And perhaps one could make perhaps you could say a hypothesis or a theory that this almost oversaturation with heroes is a sort of, maybe not intentional, but almost a reaction to that. The fact that in our lives, people seem to feel that there isn't anyone to look up to. There isn't that sort of hero to bind the community together. there isn't that figure that sort of brings people, like, that unites them around something. There isn't that core idea or that core person linked to that idea, because people don't tend to just follow like vague ideas. They tend to follow people that represent those ideas. I mean, you could even argue that Jesus himself sort of takes this abstract idea of God and sort of represents it as a concrete person. So, I mean, you could say that this oversaturation of just superhero content, of just these films just sort of getting bigger and bigger, is just this, again, maybe not a conscious move, but just a reaction to that vacuum, where there's that vacuum where, to the vacuum of heroes. So we don't have those figures anymore, and we're trying desperately to create them. And yeah, I
Mm.
feel like you could. Well, I wouldn't push that as saying this is what's going on, this is how it's working, but you could definitely. I guess it's something to consider. I'd say something to consider.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think there's definitely something to that. Like, it's like we're creating a lot of ideals. You know what I mean? Like we're creating the ideal, sort of superheroes and what society sort of visions as being sort of like the Ubermensch sort of idea,
Mm.
um, of like the perfect man, the perfect woman, and yeah, and it's interesting because if you just look at the ordinary heroes of our world are not very spectacular. Um, it's the everyday man, and the everyday man, it's like they're quite like us, meaning we can relate to them. They have flaws, and they have yeah, they struggle, just like us. And it's refreshing then to then see movies and shows that have their heroes as just being ordinary people. I can't name the films at the top of my head, but there, I would say there are a good amount of films that have, their main heroes as probably just being ordinary people just trying to, so do the right thing. And yeah, and I think contrast to the marvelization of these heroes, even in like quite godlike appearance is sort of, yeah, it's made people apathetic because we know it's much more complex. I guess much more mundane in a way. That the real heroes of our world are they're just ordinary people who end up doing extraordinary things, and sometimes it's not always a virtue. They're not always virtuous. Um,
Mm.
it's sort of, yeah, it reminds me of the classical ancient Greek hero is just um, obviously some of them were unordinary, they were demigods, but there are examples of just heroes doing extraordinary things, and they weren't necessarily virtuous people. And I guess that gives us insight into just the general human condition. Really, is we're all sinful, we all make mistakes, but I guess the heroic thing is to learn from that and to sort of um, is to transform and to try and better ourselves. I don't know, this is becoming a interesting philosophical rant now, but if you get my point,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Instead of just devolving into a cliche trope, you
it's
should
yeah,
try to represent something more authentic to lived experience. Is that what you're getting at?
yes, the authenticity is much more, yeah,
Mm.
it's much more the audience. I guess people are going to appreciate that much more now than just seeing the stereotypes just
Mm.
all over and over again.
Mm. Yeah. There's some valid points that both of you made there at the end, and I'll definitely have to, I guess, agree with both of you that in the sense of there is that sort of gap in the entertainment industry for someone who can come up with like a really good idea for a movie or TV show that's sort of just, good and also something different to what we're used to in sort of recent times. But Yeah, I guess though, even yeah, coming back to the original question, um, yeah, I agree. There's definitely an element of sort of subjectivity to it, especially with individual projects. But I think overall, you can sort of have a bit of like you can sort of objectively say that the quality has dropped just from an overall point of view. But yeah, I guess we'll sort of wrap up now. Yeah, thanks for the discussion. Yeah, it was great. Thanks, Jono, for joining us. It was great having you. Um, yeah,
I really enjoyed it. Good
yeah,
talk.
yeah. It was good to have you as our first ever guest. And having I guess three of us added a bit more to the talk and different perspectives. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks again, Tom, as well.
I think it's fair to say having Jono here has definitely helped keep us more focused as a
Yeah,
whole.
yeah, for sure. Haven't gone on too many tangents, although you got close there at the Tom, can't lie. um, yeah, no, but hope you all I hope you all enjoyed watching this video. Yeah, comment
Watching,
down.
listening, however
Yeah,
engage with
whatever
it.
you're doing, comment down what you thought, what thoughts you had on anything we spoke about, something you agreed with, something you disagreed with, any ideas that sort of we didn't talk about. Feel free to let us know. Um, yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, I guess, sort of keep in touch with the new releases. Yeah, thanks again, guys. Um, hope to see you both again soon. But other than that, hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day or night, whatever time they're watching this at, and we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.